Everyone has a different personality. They have different interests, different things that they would be really satisfied pursuing. That's not encouraged. What's encouraged is go find a job. What's encouraged is go find some place that you can shove yourself into. Go find a square hole that you can stick your round peg and just jam it in there and shave down the top and the bottom so you slide in with all this extra space on the sides and feel like shit for the rest of your life because you need a job, because you're in debt, because you have credit cards, because you have student loans, because that's what everybody does. And so you do it too. That's what's wrong. What's wrong is that we don't give, it's like we let them figure it out on their own, and it fucking takes forever. It took forever for me. The only thing that I had going for me was that I was crazy, and that I'd been spending most of my high school years fighting, so that I was already so far outside of anybody that I was so weird. I didn't fit in anywhere.
I was weird too. Isn't that funny?
I didn't feel like I had I knew one thing. I couldn't work like a regular job. Like I had to figure out something else. Because like there's the idea of, it was literally the idea of being in an office was like torture.
The hinge point between what you just said is that you said, I couldn't stand this, I couldn't work the real job, I couldn't fit into this, so I did something, I had to find another way. A lot of people get stuck with the "so I had to find another way" part. I think the problem is, though, is that it would be great, for example, to have half your schooling, maybe at that young age, be sort of a Montessori model where you say, okay, we spent our time on reading, writing, and arithmetic. Now we want you to go around, and it has to be, you can't be playing video games unless playing video games is what you want to do for a living and you're going to be able to do some educational work on it. But I mean, I would love to see more of a fostering for the fact that, listen, we're trying to create entrepreneurs here rather than trying to create drone workers on the Amazon assembly line. Now, if you end up on the Amazon assembly line anyway, great, good for you. I'm glad you can bring some food home. But the goal ought to be to let you start a business and maybe employ a bunch of other people, you know?
Yeah, and the goal would be to have less unhappy, dissatisfied people.
Because it creates a more stable society.
Well, also happier.
Yeah.
It creates more satisfaction. The people that I know that get to do what they want to do for a living, it's not like their lives are completely happy. Everybody's going to face problems, no matter who you are.
Absolutely. You know, what it was a Kanye West who said, do rich people have problems? They're just different problems. I mean, everybody's got these challenges, but like you said, there's not a lot more stressful than having a ton of credit card debt, wondering, you know, if you're going to lose your house, wondering how you're going to pay for your kids' education. I mean, all those things are soul crushing.
Not only that, because you're in debt, you get nervous, so it suppresses your ability to express yourself and take risks. Because
it's a cycle.
You don't want to lose your gig. You don't want to, it's like, man,
and you're tired.
There's no way to live.
You're tired. Yes. I mean, the one thing is, as you get older, I mean, it's funny because getting older is one of those things that you can only understand when you get there. So all through your life, you're going through these, God, isn't this the interesting part of being in your 30s or being in your 40s? So as I go into my 50s now, I'm sitting here going, energy is so under talked about.
Yeah.
You know, the ability to, like my buddy who wrote me and said, you know, I feel like I screwed up my life. I didn't take enough chances. I played it safe and now I'm so unhappy. He says, and I just can't motivate myself at 50 years old anymore, energy-wise, to start over. Energy is underrepresented.
Well, tell that guy he's got to fix his health.
I knew you were going to say that.
That's what it is. Your health is your engine.
Yeah,
your health is literally the chassis, the tires, the brakes, the engine of your vehicle that you move through this life with. And too many people don't pay attention to it.
The lack of energy is a killer. And as you get older especially.
It's not just that. It changes your ability to do things. If you don't have energy, not only will you not have the energy to pursue things, but you won't be able to do them the same way. If you have energy and enthusiasm and say like you're healthy and you want to write a book, you're going to have thoughts that'll come into your mind that won't come into your mind if you're exhausted.
Agreed.
That's fucking huge. That's huge for anything you're trying to pursue, whether we're talking about furniture making, whether we're talking about being an author, whatever it is.
Let's talk about ideas for a minute, because I think that's another one. When we talk about small businesses or starting as an entrepreneur, I'm one of those people that is not sure that we don't have a finite number of ideas to each of us, and all of them are valuable enough, even if they don't appear to be on the surface, to write down.
Yeah.
Right? As a matter of fact, I went to a business meeting a couple years ago with one of these TV guys I was just talking about, and we go to this business meeting, and we're all on our phones and whatever. He pulls out an old-fashioned journal that you write in, and he just starts writing. And I looked at that and I thought, in one sense, he looks like a dinosaur, but I went out and bought one. And now it's crazy how often, all I do is write ideas in it. And a lot of them I look back on now and I go, okay, that's still stupid. But other ones I look back on and go, God, I didn't know what this idea meant at the time, but 5 years later, this idea is really, I guess what I'm saying is that if you wanted to take almost like a religious view of it, God only gives you so many, write down and cherish the ideas. But there is something to that. Folks, what really is going to make you unique sometimes is the way your brain works differently than anyone's brain who's ever existed on the planet. That's valuable right there. Write down what comes out of the brain. Because you
capture those things.
Yes,
because
capture
if you
them.
Don't capture them, they will slip away.
And sometimes the idea isn't good until the second half arrives later, right? So idea number 1's in your book from 5 years ago. Idea number 2 that finally completes that idea arrives later. I mean, I had a friend who was so creative, and he said he gets the best ideas at night. So he just turns on the light at the side of the table, writes it down in the book, and by morning there's another idea down there.
Yeah.
And quantity has a quality all its own, and sometimes a book filled with interesting ideas out of your individual unique head will help you later on. So write them down.
Yeah,
There's no downside.
I have an app on my phone where I can just, the Notes app. You ever use that?
Sure.
Where it has a little microphone.
I
talk into that thing.
I do too.
And it dictates it really almost perfectly. So I'll have an idea and I'll just be driving down the road. I just press that button, I start talking into it, and then I put it down. I got it. I got that one. I captured it.
Think about people who had one fantastic idea in their life and built their whole life on it.
Yeah.
And you never know which idea that's going to be. And you know what? I was an improv. Again, you know more about this than I do, but I was a theater major for my first 2 years of college, and we did improv comedy. And the guy who taught us improv in high school, really, he had a great line. He said, that part of your brain, like every part of your brain, is a muscle. And he said, the more you're thinking, okay, I got a show this Friday that I have to come up with something funny for, the better you get at it.
Yeah.
And you start looking, your brain starts looking at things and finding things. So you're almost like training it to help you now in this new endeavor. It's a very plastic sort of an approach, but it's the same thing with the ideas. One idea in your little book that you wrote down could make your life, your child. I mean, if you're Henry Ford, I mean, how many people did you employ for decades afterwards because of a good idea? I mean, our world is built on those things.
And also, like, the idea of having these ideas and the enthusiasm that comes from it, like, it starts to escalate and you start to calculate, like, oh, and I need more and I need this and maybe that. And then the motivation and the momentum of these ideas can lead to enthusiasm.
And you attract other people who can add. And I mean, this is what we said about, like, you start your website and you just do it. Because things, once you push the verb of living manages to create ripples in metaphysical here, but ripples in time in front of you that open up possibilities. And because someone may, if you only have one podcast listener, but that podcast listener is like, wow, that's great, and gets a hold of you, and your life goes off in another different direction. But you have to try. You have to try.
Yeah, well, you don't have to. You can just drone on. But I would recommend not doing that.
I would also suggest that you and I and everyone has an interest in not allowing people to drone on too much, because for the same reason I talked about we did a Common Sense show once called The Revenge of the Gangrenous Finger. And the idea was that, if you ignore people in your society that aren't doing well long enough, it's a little like saying, yes, my finger has gangrene, but it's the little one, so who the hell cares? But eventually, if you ignore it long enough, it'll poison your bloodstream and destroy the body itself. If you have enough people in soul-crushing situations who can't, a guy called me once on the radio when I was preaching revolution in the middle 1990s and said, you're an idiot. He said, you're an idiot because no one's going to face the bayonets as long as they have enough food in their bellies and they're doing halfway okay. But of course, the implication there is if they don't have food in their bellies and they're not doing okay, then all bets are off. We all have a vested interest in seeing that more of our countrymen do better, because it's better for the society as a whole, creates a better world for your kids, happier. I mean, there's so many. And the one thing about our system, people talk about patriotism all the time. But to me, the real patriotism is saying we've created a system here. It works this way. It encourages people to go do these things. So if the system's designed and set up for that, you ought to give it a try. You ought to just see.
Yeah.
You know?
And the suggestion that I always give to people is write down things that you want to try to accomplish. Just write them down.
Or a guy said to me, he said, write the way you want your obituary to appear now. Sit down, write your obituary. He says, because that'll show you how far off your goals you are.
Well, here's a better one. Pretend there's a documentary crew filming your success story, and they're following you around right now. What would you do? What would you do if you knew that there was a crew following you around with cameras documenting your future incredible success, and they want to catch you in the act of it all? You would do all the right things you would have to do. Think about that. Organize it. But we are saddled down by so many doubts and so much just mental shit that keeps people from action. You know, I just feel like people need inspiration and they need guidelines. And if as long as you could just start moving, just get action, like just movement, get something.
That's what I said.
Going.
Verb. You got it.
Yeah.
And folks, listen. That's the one thing to really take out of this is that just try and see what happens. And my stepfather had a great line. He said, "What's the worst that can happen?"
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes you have to think about that to realize if you're scared about failure, don't be scared about the greatest in the world have failed. If you're worried about going into debt, I understand that.
Don't be scared of failure. I think failure is awesome for you. And that's one of the reasons why, like I said, I like doing things that I suck at. You know, you could get real complacent if you're really good at something and you only do that thing all the time.
I agree with that. And you're not growing anymore.
Yeah, you're just not challenged. You're not at the bottom of the heap. You know, if you start jiu-jitsu right now and you're a white belt, you're like, oh God, what the? How could I ever get good at this? And it's humbling. But in that humbling thing, you learn about yourself, you learn about discipline, and you build up that engine, that muscle that is trying to work things out and figure things out.